As usual, the shurim this year dedicated to the memory of Elisheva Frist, Elisheva Sima Bat Zalman Zichronah Livracha. I'd like to also take the opportunity of dedicating the shur to the memory of my dear mother-in-law, mother of my wife Miriam sitting here, my sister-in-law Betty sitting here, and my sister-in-law Judy, who hasn't gotten up yet in New York. My mother-in-law's first yard site, and B'chazdei Hashem, she made it to almost 103, and with fairly good health till the very, very end. And she is sorely missed by us and the family. Very much a family person. Was a very, very optimistic person. I mean, one of the great lines that we all end conversation, my mother-in-law would always say, "Let's hope. Let's hope." It was always a "let's hope." And Mirz Hashem, it'll be good, it'll be better, and so on. Last week, we actually touched on the poem Shushanat Yaakov. I'm just going to recap for a few minutes and then pick up from where we were. That's not only a good idea to do when you're stuck in a snowstorm trying to get out of a parking space. It's always good to do reverse first, back up, and then move out. But Rashi knew that as well in Parshat Shmot, where there was an interruption in the text. After it says something about Moshe Rabbeinu being Aral Svatayim, there's an interruption in the text, and then the text picks up from where it left off. Rashi says this is normal. You have a break in the action, you want to get back on track, so let's take a few steps back. And he repeats a little bit, the Torah repeats what it said before the interruption. So we'll just take just a few steps back. We mentioned that this is a poem that is based on the Aleph Bet, from Aleph to Taf. The letter Shin is Shushanat Yaakov. The letter Taf is Shuatam Hayita Lanetzach. With these two lines that we know from the poem Shushanat Yaakov, is nothing but the last two lines of a poem that has 22 lines, starting from Asher Heini Atzat Goyim Vayafer Machshavot Arumim, which you have on the page on the bottom of the first side of the page, and it continues to the top of the second side. And you can see clearly that the last two lines are Shushanat Yaakov Tzalav V'Samecha, B'rotam Yachat Chelet TORAH, Shuatam Hayita Lanetzach, V'tikvatam B'chol Dovador. That's the end of the poem. Now, in our Sidurim, we have a little bit, some run-on, some extras. And let's take a look. What are the extras? On the first page on top, I printed the first two lines, which are the last two lines of the poem, but it's the song Shushanat Yaakov that many of us on Purim morning, after the reading of the Megillah, so we don't say, as I mentioned, the many kihilot, the Asher Heini, the long-winded poem, but we somehow just pick up on the last two lines and continue with Lahodia Shekol Korvecha Lo Yevoshu V'Lo Yikolmu Lanetzach Kol HaChosebo, to teach you, to inform you that all of our hopes never get dried up, perhaps, or everything that Kadosh Baruch Hu wants for us is going to be forever. Okay, nobody knows really the source of this. I try to flush out from various sources that I have where this comes from, where this pasuk comes from, and it's got somehow integrated into the Siddur as an addendum to this poem. Some people think it's an addendum to the poem of Asher Heini, but that's not really logical. First of all, it doesn't fit the scheme of the Aleph Bet. It's just a lamed. And second, in many of the early versions of Asher Heini, you don't have it at all. So it somehow got in there. But the next few lines are significant. Arur Haman Asher Bikesh La'avdi, cursed Haman, who tried to destroy me. Baruch Mordechai, Baruch Mordechai. It could be that this line was composed based on the Gemara in Masechet Megillah, where we learn about getting drunk on Purim. So, while the concept of Yom Mishteh V'Simcha, Yemei Mishteh V'Simcha, that's in the Megillah, but the Megillah doesn't tell us what's on the menu for the Yemei Mishteh V'Simcha. So the Gemara tells us that two of the Amoraim got stone drunk on Purim, and one picked up a knife or whatever, and he kills the other one out of drunkenness. And then when he sobers up, he realizes what he does, and he offers a tefillah to Kadosh Baruch Hu, and he revives him. Okay, now, if this is going to be taken at face value, then we should have had a Yom Tov for something like that. I mean, human beings don't pull off Tchiyat HaMeitim of this nature. But the Gemara continues, the next year, one says to the other, let's get drunk on Purim. And the other one, who was the slaughtered one, says, not every year can you pull off a miracle. I'm not interested in trying this out for a second time. Okay, so many poskim say, you know who's allowed to get stone drunk on Purim? If you have the ability to pull off a Tchiyat HaMeitim, then you can get drunk on Purim. But if you don't have that ability, you don't know if you try. But so you have to be machmir, right? Because it's sofek d'oraita l'chumra. So if you don't think you're in that league of being able to pull off Tchiyat HaMeitim, try to maintain some level of being sober and so on. There are many, many poskim who actually feel that that's the point of the Gemara. It's not whether he was slaughtered or not slaughtered, Tchiyat HaMeitim, not Tchiyat HaMeitim. Nobody really thinks that really happens, except those who are translating or interpreting the Agadot of the Gemara literally. And there are some who think that's what you're supposed to do. And I'll just say parenthetically that, remind me where I'm up to, because I'm parenthetically. I was just saying parenthetically that the Rav once said that if you think that everything written in the Agadot, in the legends of Chazal, it can't happen. It's impossible. It's ridiculous. Says, you're a real heretic. You're an apikoros. But if you think that everything written in the Medrash happened exactly like that, you're a fool. So the answer is somewhere in between. There are some Agadot that actually enhance the biblical text. It goes a little beyond certain traditions, oral traditions that are not factored into the psukim. And the Chazal had traditions that now we can somehow embellish the biblical story. And then there are those midrashim that the last thing in the world that Chazal were doing was adding, but they were fabricating in a positive sense to teach us a moral message. And what they did was they pinned the tail on the donkey. They pinned their idea on a pasuk that, it gives it a little bit schmaltz and a little bit body and a little bit flavor and so on. These type of stories that are so way out, to think that really that's what happened. I mean, I'll give you an example. Don't worry, I'm not finished with the window.
I'm concentrating.
Right, you're concentrating. Right. Just remember where I was. Where was I? The Gemara talks about Elazar ben Azariah, who was 18 years old, and he was appointed as the Rosh HaSanhedrin, the Nasi, because of a whole scum. You know that whole story. But the Gemara says that miraculously he grows a long beard, and that's why he said, "Harei ani keven shevim shana." I look like 70. But really, I'm 18 years old. But I think this long beard, long white beard. He says that's what Gemara says, white beard. It all turned white overnight. Okay, the Rambam is a rationalist, and he says that people in position of authority age early. They age prematurely because of responsibility. Sometimes you see this: a guy who's selected, in certain task, and 4 years later he looks like an old man. And normally a person wouldn't age in that time span. So that's what Rambam says, that, because of the responsibility, it was a big shock for him, and he aged prematurely. But it wasn't that overnight. Rambam didn't believe that overnight he grew a long white beard. That he could have done at the Purim costume store. He could have bought one. But that's not what happened. I'm just pointing this out, that the Rambam did not interpret literally, word for word, what we had in the Gemara. Okay, so where were we?
You should not take literally. The last thing you said.
The last thing I said was not take literally.
Right.
So the Gemara says there, how much should you get drunk? So before the Gemara brings the story of the two Amoraim who got drunk, it says, Mechayev inish lipsume lebepuria ad lo yada ben arur haman lebaruch Mordechai. On Purim, you're obligated to get drunk to the extent that you cannot distinguish between Arur Haman and Baruch Mordechai. So that means you've lost it a little bit. You're a little bit shaky. Your equilibrium of thought has somehow been shaken up. Beseda. So on that line of the Gemara was composed Arur Haman Asher Bikesh La'adi Baruch Mordechai HaYehudi. So we have, where this line may have come from. And then there's Arura Zeresh Eshet Mafridi Brucha Esther Ba'adi, and some people had Migina Ba'adi, my one who protected us. Arurim Kol HaReshaim Baruchim Kol HaTzadikim. In my Siddur, you don't have that. In my Siddur, you don't have that. And then it says, V'gam Charvona Zachula Tov. I mean, my gosh, what did Charvona do already? He squeals that there was a tree, you know. Okay, so for that alone, every year we have to remember Charvona. You know, apparently he wasn't such a groiser tzaddik, but he did something that worked in our favor at the moment, because it was the timing that was important. You know, Achashverosh was having a fit, and right then and there, Charvona throws in his little 2 cents, and it impacted. So therefore, for Gam Charvona, what's up? So if you look under this poem, you have a few sources. So source number one we did last week, we showed from Professor Abraham Grossman, from the manuscript from Oxford, that the author might be a Rabbi Asher, and that's why the first word is Asher Heini Atzat Goyim, that maybe he signs off right at the beginning of the poem with his name Asher, who is the grandfather of one of the teachers of Rashi, Rabbi Yitzchak HaLevi, which makes him pretty early. Okay, then I'm just scrolling down now to source number 6. Source number 6 is the Yerushalmi in Masechet Megillah, and it says, Rav Amar, the Amora Rav said, Tzarich lomar arur Haman arurim banav, that you should, at the end of the Megillah, make such a proclamation. Arur Haman, cursed be Haman, cursed be his children, and so on. Omer Rabbi Pinchas, another Amora of Eretz Israel, Tzarich lomar Charvona zachur latov. Let's not forget Mr. Charvona, for his moment on stage worked out beneficially for Am Yisrael. So you have this idea, and if you look at the next source, it's called Masechet of Mesichtot Ktanot, the baby Mesichtot. So, you know, all the Daf Yomi people would actually enjoy to have short Mesichtot. The only thing is, they're not short at all in numbers of chapters, and the only reason they're called Mesichtot Ktanot, because it's actually not part of the Gemara. It's not part of the Mishnah and Gemara, but they were printed in the Vilna Shas. You have what they call Mechnosot Ktanot. Masechet Sofrim is way over 20 chapters, and in chapter 14, it reads as follows. It's a work from the days of the Geonim, perhaps put together, compiled in the 7th or 8th century, and it uses material from the Gemara, but it wasn't a Gemara itself. It's a compilation of different things that we have about Chagim, about other customs, and so on. And he says, when you finish reading the Megillah, Mikales. Mikales means you praise. Kilus in Hebrew is praise, the Shevach. Mikales latzadikim. And you say, Baruch Mordechai, Barucha Esther, Baruchim Kol Yisrael. So you see where all this comes from, you know, that we should have. And then he quotes the Gemara. Rav Amar, Tzarich Lomar, Arur Haman, Arurim Banav, Omer Rabbi Pinchas, Tzarich Lomar, Chavona Zachul Tov. So you have this quote from the Talmud Yerushalmi integrated into this Masechet Sofrim, and that's really what made it into the Sidurim, where after the Brachot and after the Ashaheni and after the Shushanat Yaakov, and you have the Arur Haman and so on. So we have a source where this comes from that we should be declaring. What's the difference? Why should we? I mean, Haman's gone. His children are gone. So the answer is they're not gone. They're not gone. That's the point. They're not gone. Here, so we have a new version of the 10 sons of Haman hanging. You got it also?
Yes.
I didn't get it. Maybe I did get it. Yeah, okay. It has Sinwar and it has all the names, the popular names of the last year and a quarter. Yeah, one after the other, who were, you know, dealt a death blow. And here it's Purim, and it's not just poking fun, but these are descendants of Haman in the sense of those who are Lashmid, Larog, again, Ve'et Sinwar, Ve'et Hania, Ve'et Def, Ve'et Isa, Ve'et Nasrallah, Ve'et, I'm sad I can't even pronounce it.
In one breath.
One breath, right. One breath. You got to get one breath. Right. Right. This is a very important mitzvah, right? To read the 10 sons of Haman in one breath, right? So the Shabbos after Purim, so this year, Purim here in Shleim is Kitisa, but last year it was, but in Chutz La'aretz, in Chutz Yerushalayim, it's just a regular Shabbos. It's not Purim anymore. So reading Parshat Kitisa. We're all reading Kitisa. My son Itan, whose birthday is today, as a matter of fact, so his bar mitzvah was Parshat Kitisa. And remember Kitisa, the first 2/3 of the parasha, you're only at Sheni. And that's because we don't want to have anybody but a Kohen or Levi read about the Egel, because they didn't serve the Egel. But everybody else had something to do with the Egel, so you don't want to embarrass anybody from any other Shevet. So the Levium, Kohen, first Aliyah, Levi, second Aliyah, you're at Shlishi, you're 2/3 through the parasha already. So my father Shalom went up to Eitan on a bar mitzvah by Shlishi, and he says, the minhag of reading in one breath was only said about the 10 days of Haman. It sounded like he laned those two aliyahs, Benishima Achat. That's right. But he laid it okay. It was with perfect trust. But it was, he was on, a F-15I, in his afterburners. That's how he laned. Beseda. So you have this little end. Let's take a look again at the poem, and it's a poetic referral to or review of the Megillah with some Agadic add-ons, as is done. In Chutz La'aretz, in some shuls, in the Chazarat HaShatz of Purim in the morning, they add what they call yotzerot, which are piyutim. Here in Eretz Yisrael, zero. It's not printed in any siddur, and that has to do with the fact that the Vilna Gaon was against all of these add-ons in the middle of Chazarat HaShatz. In spite of the fact that they were done by great poets like Elazar Kalir of the 7th century, in Chutz La'aretz, I remember some shul saying it, that after each bracha of Shemona Esrei, it's a weekday Shemona Esrei. So before you say, Baruch Atah Hashem, Chonin Adat, Baruch Atah Hashem, Chanun Melech, the Chazan would then go up with a poem, and everybody would say it, and he would end up with the last. There's even nusach for these Yitzros, for Shabbos HaGodel, for Shabbos Shkolim, and Shabbos HaGodel, and Shabbos Parah, and Shabbos Parshat HaChodesh, and for Musaf of Shkolim and HaChodesh, and for Yom Tov, and some what? Yom Kippur, plenty. So I can tell you that the Rav Zechron Lebracha, who followed generally the minhag of the Vilna Gaon, didn't have any of these poetry integrated, and his only exception was Unetana Tokef on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, which is also a poem. Unetana Tokef is also a poem integrated into Chazarat HaShatz, and he said, "What's Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur without Unetana Tokef?" So he deferred to the minhag. He actually went against the general minhag. But you imagine Chazarat HaShatz on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur without the piyutim? I mean, that's really, you can go home early, right? But on Yom Kippur, my father would say, "Vi Leifman, where's everybody running?" Right? They have no break because they say everything. They say everything. By Breuers in Washington Heights in the Frankfurt community, they said every little word. The Galicianas skipped the small print. That was the name of the game. You only said that was bold, and that's why they ended up printing the bold. And the other ones, they didn't bother saying it. So here, the Asher Haney, a lot of people just don't say it because it's small print, and Shushanat Yaakov was printed in big print, bold print, because it's a song. But Asher Haney Atzad Goyim Vayafer Machshavot Arumim, and this was we said last week already. This is the pasuk that we say in Tehillim every morning in Psukei Zimra of Hashem Hefir Atzad Goyim Heini Machshavot Amim. Kadosh Baruch Hu drove away the. But I'm going to do this quickly because I want to get down to the what we left off last week. B'kum aleinu Adam Rasha Netzer Zadon Mizera Amalek. Here, this Rasha stood up, and he came from the generations of Amalek. Of course, not necessarily. He was from Amalek. Haman Agagi from Agag. Ga'am ba'oshro. He was very proud with his wealth. He dug his own pit, as we would say in English. That's exactly what this is. Karalo bor. He dug his own ditch. Ugdulato nuksha lo lachad. His greatness, he actually planted his own trap. Dima ben afshol lilkod v'nilkad. He tried to capture, but he was caught. Bikshu lashmir, he tried to destroy, v'nishmat mehera, and he was quickly destroyed. This is what we call midah keneged midah, a measure for a measure, an eye for an eye, ayin tachat ayin. So of course, in Parshat Mishpatim, we talk about ayin tachat ayin. It's halachically interpreted as a monetary compensation, right? We don't gouge out somebody's eye if he damaged the eye, or amputate or chain tachat chain, or knock out his tooth, or amputate a leg or an arm. But I remember the Rav saying in his speech in 1956, I wasn't there, I was 4 years old, but I was down the block. I lived in Washington Heights, and the Rav said it on 185th Street on Amsterdam Avenue. and it was his famous big speech of Yom Ha'atzmaut, Kol Dodi Dofek, right? He from Shir, and he hears 6 knockings on the door. And one was the political, it was the military, the theological, the social. It was just an unbelievable manifesto for religious Zionism. It's been translated to many languages, and it was the first piece of the Rav's Torah that came on Aliyah. It was integrated into the syllabus of the education ministry for the high school kids who are doing Machshevet Yisrael, Jewish thought, and this was the first thing that made it in Israel. Kol Dodi Dofek. So there, the Rav said that when talking about he's talking about Egypt then, and Jordan and Syria and Lebanon, and Iraq, those who invaded Israel right with the establishment of Medinat Yisrael, he says today we have to deal a blow in return as ayin tachat ayin mamash, an eye for an eye. This is not monetary compensation. The Rebbe was very, very vocal about this. He says you have to, on their language. This is the language they understand. Ayin tachat ayin. Haman hodia evat avotav orer sinat achim libanim. Haman informed people of the enmity of his forefathers. Now, if he goes back to Amalek, Amalek is the grandchild of Esav. So this really takes us now back to Parshat Toldot, Vayetze, Vayishlach, of Yaakov and Esav. The Gemara says that Rashi brings this, Halacha biyadua she'esav sonei Yaakov. They don't really have a good reason. So what? We have to understand that this is a reality. So it doesn't make logical sense. And the sinat achim libanim, this is the hatred of the brothers of Yaakov and Esav for the generations to come. And Haman brings it out. V'lo zachar rachamei Shaul ki b'chemlato al Agag nolad oyev. And he didn't remember. This is what we call kafui tova. He's not showing the proper appreciation. Shaul HaMelech, who pays a bitter price for sparing the life of Agag. And if you didn't pick that up in last Shabbos Haftarah, so this Shabbos we're going to get the Shidur Choser, repeat performance of the same Haftarah, but only in Yerushalayim. So if you go to Tel Aviv, you're not going to hear it. You're going to hear Haftarah of Parshat Kitisa. Because in Yerushalayim, there's going to be a second Sefer Torah this Shabbat, and you're going to read what everybody else is going to read this Friday, Vayavo Amalek, from the end of Parshat Bishalach. And whereas it's a mafter of Vayavo Amalek, so the Haftarah also has to reflect it. And we're just going to repeat the same Haftarah. And we're going to hear for the second time that Shaul HaMelech is accused by Shmuel HaNavi, Umeh Kol Hatzon. And what about the sheep that I'm hearing? The meh. The word should have been Umah Kol Hatzon. But the Masorah changed it to Meh Kol Hatzon, so you hear the sound of the sheep when it's being read. And the tam, we call in Yiddish, the trub, is a tvir. Umeh Kol Hatzon. You actually hear it. And you're going to hear, if you didn't pick it up last Shabbos, listen carefully this Shabbos, and you'll hear it again. And of course, Shaul's great answer, like every politician, the people wanted it. Right? This is all for the opinion polls. The people wanted it. And I serve the people. I don't serve God. Kadosh Baruch Hu said something else. Yeah, but the people, I have to answer to the people. So here, Haman didn't remember this great chesed that Shaul pays bitterly and loses the melucha. Ultimately, is killed on the battlefield. Some say he committed suicide, but he certainly requested it from the compassion that he showed to Agag, who gave birth to this enemy. Because of Agag, we have Haman, and it's all. So why didn't he realize that Shaul HaMelech deserves a yashakayach and not a death sentence for the Torah nation? V'lo zachar rachamei Shaul ki b'chemlato al Agag nolad oyev. Zamam rasha lachrit tzadik. This rasha he plans to destroy. Lachrit. What does the word karet mean? We say cut off. Means cut off. So in the halacha, when we say somebody did an avera where there's the punishment is karet, so it sometimes some say it means premature death, and some say loss of olam haba, and some say both. It's based on a pasuk in Parshat Shlach, hi karet ti karet, and the Gemara Masechet Sanhedrin, right? Daf Samach Daled, remember that one? Samach Daled in Sanhedrin, hi karet me'olam hazeh, ti karet me'olam haba. Okay, and the Rambam focuses on the Olam Haba in the 8th chapter of Hilchot Tshuva, that this is loss of Olam Haba. So that, nobody's interested in it all. But there's also a shot to what karet is. If somebody habitually, we're not talking about one time only, one shot deal, but a habitual of sinner, of averot of karet, and they include eating chametz on Pesach, not fasting on Yom Kippur, not doing a Brit Milah. I mean, these are the hardcore mitzvahs that connect you to Klal Yisrael. V'nichrita hanefesh hahi me'ameha. That's what the Torah says. You are cutting yourself off from your people. The generations afterwards are going to be goyim. They'll be goyim. And it was already the Sfat Emet, the second Rebbe of Gur, who explains why in the Aseret HaDibrot does it say Oseh Chesed la'alafim? Kadosh Baruch Hu will reward 1,000 generations. But if it's the other way around, it says 3 or 4 generations. Shileshim v'abibayim l'sonai. Is that fair? This whole balance is not fair. He says because there's no 5th generation to talk to. There won't be a 5th generation to talk to. That's what he said. But on the other side of the fence, there'll still be somebody 1,000 generations later to talk to, in the fold, in the family. How true, how true. I remember Rabbi Izzy Miller, Zechron Bracha, those who remember him, was a very, very important rabbi in the Bronx, but he was also vice president of Yeshiva University, and he was the president of this, of RCA, and the Mizrahi, and this and that. So he was once introduced as he was the ex-president of the Mizrahi in America, and ex-president of the RCA, and this and that. His wife said, "My husband has X appeal." She said it. He was the ex-president. He was a very, very good person. So Rabbi Miller said that on Seder night, we have the 4 sons. He says there's actually a 5th son. He's the son who's not here. He's not here. Even the She'ino Yodea Lish'ol is sitting around the table, maybe without a kippah, but he's still there. He's still there. The 5th son is not there. And then he said, Rabbi Miller said, it reflected 4 generations of the immigration of Jews from Eastern Europe in the late 19th century, 1880s. So the first generation, they were fundamentally Shomrei Torah mitzvot. They came with Shabbat, they came with this, they came with tradition. They were Jews with kippot, so that was the Ben HaChacham. But the next generation, they had to Americanize very quickly, so they dumped everything. So they became the Ben HaRasha. That Ben HaRasha had a son. Father did nothing, but he had a Zayda that was putting on tefillin, and he didn't know what it was. He said Mazot. He was the Tam. But the next generation was the She'ino Yedel Lishol, because his grandfather was the Russia. So he said this was American Jewry. There's Keneged Arba'a Banim Dibra Torah. It's very sad, but it was so true. Not always. I mean, obviously exceptions. We're sitting here in this room. I'm sure there are plenty of exceptions. But the trend was correct. So, Zamam Rasha Lachrit Tzaddik. He wanted to annihilate. That's what the word karet is. Annihilate Mordechai. And not just Mordechai. What does it say about Mordechai? He's defined as Am Mordechai. So Mordechai doesn't want to bow down. All right. You think it's a terrible thing, so have Mordechai executed. Why take it out on the whole nation, the Jewish people, in 127 dominions? What did they have to do with the fact that Mordechai lo yichra v'lo yishtachaveh? So he said, they're Jews, right? So it says, Am Mordechai. What does that mean? So Rav explained that the hallmark of a real leader is somebody who, in his heart, he beats the beats of the entire nation. Everybody. He's got everybody in mind. Chazal say it about Moshe Rabbeinu, Moshe Shakul Keneged Shishim Ribo. He was equivalent to 600,000. The concept of equivalency. And here you have Mordechai. It's not just Mr. Mordechai. It's Mordechai representing Am Mordechai. And Haman knew that. And therefore, just getting rid of Mordechai alone wasn't good enough because he had followers. And whatever Mordechai is going to do, everybody else is going to do. And therefore, everybody had to go, according to Haman. But then, Chesed Gavar al Shigigat Av. Rasha al Shigigat Av. Rasha Hosif Chet al Chet'o, Chet Av. Yeah, the Rasha kept adding, but who is Chesed? Do you remember when Esther enters into the picture? Vatisa Chen v'Chesed. Chen v'Chesed to Achashverosh. So Chen will see shortly in the poem, and Chesed, she was somehow reflected in her character and personality, Chesed. Esther. Chesed is a nickname now for Esther. Esther is going to somehow reply or deal with or rectify, tikkun, rectify the sin of her father. Who's the father? Chazal say she's a great, 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 great granddaughter of Shaul HaMelech. Now they all come from the tribe of Binyamin, right? Shaul's from Binyamin. Ish Yehudi Haya b'Shushanat birash Shmoi Mordechai ben Yair ben Shemi ben Kish Ish Yemini. So it doesn't mean he batted right-handed. He wasn't. It means he was from Shevet Binyamin. Well, a second. It says Ish Yehudi. Wasn't he from Shevet Yehuda? No. Already the tail end of Bayit Rishon, after the loss and the exile of the 10 tribes, what was left was Shevet Eretz Yehuda, and there were majority Shevet Yehuda, minority Shevet Binyamin, and Kohanim Leviim, whoever were there from Shevet Levi. So the people of Eretz Yehuda were called Yehudim. That's where it comes from. And later the Romans called Eretz Yisrael Judea, and therefore the citizens of Judea were Jews. And that's how we got the name Jews. But it's from Eretz Yehuda. That's where it comes from. And in Megillat Esther, we're called, in our sense, Jews. Not necessarily from Shevet Yehuda. Even if a guy's a Levi or a Kohen, he's a Yehudi. And it's certainly Shevet Binyamin. He's a Yehudi. And that's why it says at the end of Megillah, when people were jumping, Goyim were jumping on the bandwagon to Judaize, which means to convert, V'chol amei haaretz mityahadim. What does it mean, mityahadim? They became Jewish. That's what it means in our sense of the word. So Ish Yehudi was Jewish, but he was from Ish Yemini, he was from Shevet Binyamin. And Esther was Layudim to the Jews, right? Correct. So Esther was from Shevet Binyamin, and Chazal say she was direct descendant of Shaul HaMelech, and she's going to rectify that sin. Taman belibo machshavot arumav vayitnaker lasot ra'ah. He hid in his heart. He was like this was sitting with him for a while. This naked thought of what he's going to do to Am Yisrael. Vayitnaker lasot ra'ah. The word vayitnaker is found in Breshit with the Yosef story. Vayitnaker lasot, which he takes it out there. But in this context, it's Haman who's really getting geared up to do something evil. Yado shalach bikdoshe el. He is willing to strike the ones who are the holy ones of God. So starting with Mordechai, of course. Kaspo natan lachrit zichram. Again, the usage of the word karet. Second time. Now he's willing to cough up a lot of money. Vaseret alafim kikar kesef eshkol al yedei osem lacha. Haman tells Achashverosh, for the great schut, merit of being able to wipe out the Jews, I'm going to make a donation to your coffers, 10,000 kikar kesef, eshkol from the word to weigh out, the word shokel. But from here comes the biblical coin, shekel, because money is weighed out. Esrim gera hashekel, machzit hashekel, trumal Hashem, which we'll read this week again, which we read just a few weeks ago in Parshat Shkalim. So gera is a weight. Like today you have a kilo and a gram. So gera is a weight. Esrim gera is a shekel. So half a shekel is what you have to weigh it out. You have to weigh it out. So that's why it's called shekel. Beseda. So, today we went back to the biblical coin. We used to have lira here until 1981, right? And we moved over to the shekel. And that was a story in itself because we were here already in Israel in 1981. And then the treasury minister, his name was Yigal Horovitz, Olav Shalom. He announces there's going to be a very important TV, radio announcement at 3 o'clock on a Friday. Remember, on a Friday, and people were very nervous. We were going through hyperinflation of 400% inflation. The next day, you never knew what the prices were because everything was changing. I mean, it was really crazy. And everybody knew, people thought there was going to be a major devaluation, and he wanted this to be on Friday when the stock market is closed and the banks are closed, and therefore people will be able to sleep over it and have their children and kugel over Shabbos. They'll wake up Sunday morning, and then they won't remember, what happened. That's what he thought. After all the Kiddush and Havdalah, you get drunk in the shine. So he thought that. So he gets up and he says, in honor of Shabbat Parshat Shkalim, we are moving from the lira to the shekel. And I looked at him and I said, last Shabbos was Shabbos Shkola. Not this Shabbos. So he was off by 6 days. All right? That's why somebody advised them, said it's a good time to do it because it's Shabbat Pashat Shkalim. He said in honor of Shabbat Shkalim tomorrow.
That was the old shekel.
He went from the lira to the old shekel. He went from the lira to the old shekel, but they didn't call it yet the old shekel because they didn't know it was the old shekel until 2 years later when they further devalued it and made it the new shekel. That's why now it's called shach. It's called the shekel chadash. But the old shekel lasted. Right. It's like the Alt Neu Shul, the Alt Neu Shul in Prague. What does Alt Neu Shul means? The old new shul. So what do you mean? They built this gorgeous shul and they called it Beit Knesset HaChadash. In Yiddish, the Naya Shul. And people call it the Naya Shul. Fine. And then later, a few years later, they built another shul and they called that the Naya Shul, the new shul. 1 second, there is. So they call this is the old new shul. That's called the Alt Neu Shul. Right, I was going to say that. Thank you. Right, it's like in Hebrew when how do you say an axle? The two tires. It's called an axle. And right. And the back axle is called the back axle. The back axle. How do you call the front axle? The back axle kit me. The front back axle. That's how it's called. A back axle kit me. The front back axle. Right. That's almost like my machronim vasa. You know what that is? Mayim achronim vasa. You already said mayim, right? Mayim achronim vasa. So okay. So you have the Alt Neu Shul. People say, you know why it's called Alt Neu Shul? Because it's Al Tinai, on condition. Alt Neu, because shuls and Chutz La'aretz are built on condition that there's a functioning Jewish community there, and that's why when a Jewish shul in Chutz La'aretz goes defunct, out of business, they're allowed to sell the building. In Eretz Yisrael, all the shuls have Kedusha, even if they're destroyed. So if you go up to Masada, and where Yigal Yadin in 1962 excavated the place that he said this was the Beit Knesset, and you're looking for a place for Mincha, that's the place to daven, because it still has a halacha of Beit Knesset. That's one of the differences between Kedushat Makom of Chutz La'aretz and Eretz Yisrael. In Eretz Yisrael, it's only Beit Knesset, Beit Midrash, Hani Kadosh, provided that it's functioning as a Beit Knesset and Beit Midrash. Once it's out of business, it loses its Kedusha. And we have that when we go to Europe and tour Poland or Spain, wherever you go, you have shuls that are no longer functioning as shuls, so they don't have Kedusha any longer, even though emotionally you feel you want to strike up a tefillah there because once upon a time it was a shul. Okay, so you have here, Yado Shalach B'Kedoshei El Kaspo Natan Lachrit Zichram. He's willing to cough up a lot of money. So here, the Gemara tells us that this giving of a lot of money had to be neutralized by a schut of Am Yisrael. And the Gemara says, Hikdim shkalim lishkalav. The Torah beat him to his punch, beat him at his game. And that was that on Rosh Chodesh Adar, Be'echad Ba'adar, Mashmi'in ala shkalim. We announced the annual UJA, the giving of the half shekel to the Beit HaMikdash, 2 weeks before Purim. So Am Yisrael has a schut, has a merit, before Haman can cash in with his shkalim. So before he gets his thing, we already have come up with the mitzvah of shkalim. Hikdim shkalim lishkalav. We beat him to lakdim trufa lemakav, which means to have the remedy on the shelf before the disease or illness touches down. And that's very, very important. So I remember once a conversation with the Rav Zechron Lebracha. We were talking about some item that popped up in the Israeli newspapers, and I told the Rav, I said they're talking in the Knesset for the umptiest time about the law of Miu Yehudi, the law of return, which guarantees Jews to, first law of the Knesset, by the way, 1949, that guarantees any Jew to come back to Eretz Yisrael and assume immediate citizenship, like you don't have to wait 5 years, immediate citizenship, but you have to be Jewish. So who's a Jew? It says Jewish mother and Giyur. Okay, but it doesn't use the word Giyur Kalacha. This was a big issue from day one, because they didn't put the word Kalacha because they didn't want to box out the conservative and reformed Jewish organizations. So they just left it to Giyur. I remember Menachem Begin, Olav Shalom, said, I don't understand. It says, Giyur? That's a halacha. There's no such thing as Giyur, not la halacha. Begin said it. So what do you have to have the word la halacha? But there were a lot of people pushing and pushing. So the Rav tells me, he says, Miu Yehudi, who is a Jew? You don't need a Shulchan Aruch. Go ask your local anti-Semite, and he'll tell you exactly who's a Jew and l'chumra. He'll know exactly who's a Jew. So the Rav said it tells me this as a comical, comment. It turns out there's something to it. That's why Chazal say, "Afilu sichat chulin shel talmidei chachamim tzarich talmud." Even if the Talmud Chacham says something that doesn't seem to be a serious Torah comment, take it seriously. Listen, you can learn something from it. Because when the Gemara says about the shkalim, hikdim shkalim l'shkalav, so who did Haman wanted to kill? Wanted to kill Am Yisrael. Yeshno Am Echad, Mufuzam Forad Menagim, right? Lashmid, Lahog, et Kol HaYudim, Minar Batzakerin, Taf Anashim B'Yom Echad. So who was a Jew? How did Haman know who was a Jew? So hikdim shkalim l'shkalav. In the midst of shkalim, there's something very unusual. Because most mitzvot, the Torah gave it to Klal Yisrael, but the obligation is binding on the individual. So it's not that Klal Yisrael has to eat matzah on Seder night. Every Jew has to eat matzah on Seder night. There's no big yichus that 12 shvatim ate matzah on Seder night. And every Jew has a mitzvah of shofar. So it's not that Am Yisrael listens to the shofar. The Jew has to listen to the shofar. But with shkalim, it says, Ze yitenu kol over al apkudim. We're going to read it the Shabbos, the first psukim of the parsha. What's the gematria of Ze, Zayin Hey? 12. And in Talmud Yerushalmi, in Masechet Megillah, it says, Ze shneim asar shvatim yitnu. 12 tribes should give. One second, I don't get it. Why 12 tribes? 12 tribes have to do everything. So why 12 tribes have to give? So the answer is that the fulfillment of the mitzvah Machzah Shekel is Klal Yisrael. And that's why the halacha was that they announced on Rosh Chodesh Adar, okay, the season for giving the Machzah Shekel has begun. All the Yekes were online, and they gave on Rosh Chodesh. That's no question about it. But in other places, on the 15th of Adar, they set up tables, or it reminds me of the booths of the lottery, the Mifal HaPayis, the lottery booths, all over the conveniently located booths or tables for people to pass by and give their Machzor Shekel, you signed in. And by the 23rd of Adar, if you're not on the list and having been a giver, they come around knocking on your door, Hakesh Badelet, and if you say, I really would like to give, but I've had it with Mr. Cohen at Beit HaMikdash. He made me wait too long online last year when I brought a Korban Pesach. This year, I'm not giving. You're not giving? The guy whistled, crashed through the door. They took your couch. They took your microwave. They took your stuff. All right. Here's the darn half shekel, They twisted you. Hotzah lefol mamish. Yefeh. Hotzah lefol mamish. It was kofin oto achi omar rotzeani. And the only ones that they didn't apply all this coercion were the Kohanim, and that's a whole shir in itself. Did the Kohanim have to give Machzor Shekel or not? But the Rambam does a flip on this and says that they did have to give the Machzor Shekel, except they didn't coerce. If Mr. Cohen didn't want to give, they let him alone. They didn't say, okay, you don't have to give. They just said, you're out of line, but they didn't take his couch. They just left him alone. And the feeling was, because the Kohanim work in Beit HaMikdash, so they're doing their thing anyway. The Machzor Shekel was to purchase the Korbanot Tzibur, the public sacrifices, and the monies on Rosh Chodesh Nisan had to come from the new monies, the new collection. So they gave Am Yisrael a month to do it. And that for sure. So who was the Am Yisrael who would be fulfilling the mitzvah of Machzor Shekel? 12 Shvatim. Everybody. Haman knew that. If you wanted to know who was Haman out to get, the answer is take a look at the laws of Machzor Shekel and you'll figure it out. And that, what the Rav said as a joke, was far from a joke. Haman knew who Am Yisrael was. Hitler Yamach Shemo did a lot of research. Even if you're a fourth generation Goy, but your great-grandfather, was Jewish, I think great-great-grandfather, right? Was 3 generations or 4? From same great-grandmother? Right. There was a thing that even if you were halachically a Goy, but you were a few generations before, you're still on his list. You were still on his list.
If you don't know who's a Jew,
Yeah.
he'll show you.
He'll show you. Right. Video. Beseder. So do Reform Jews also. All I'm saying is, that's what the Rav said as a joke. He said they know who every Jew is and l'chumra. Just in case there's a suffix, they can tell you who it is. Okay, hala. So it says kirot Mordechai, ki yatsa ketzev. The phrase yatsa ketzev is found already in the Korach story. Yatsa ketzev, the anger of God is out there. Yes, Mordechai saw yatsa ketzev. Vidate Haman nitno b'Shushan, and the edict of Haman was given in Shushan. That means law. It means that Torah is law. Doesn't mean religion here. It means the law. The edict of Haman was all. Not the Megillah says very clearly. Lavash sak v'kashar misped gazar tzom vayeshev al efer. Means all the things that we see from the 4th chapter. Who sak va'efer yutzal lerabim and knosat kol yudim and imtzim v'shushan v'tzumo lai v'al tochlu shloshet yamim lai levayom. All of this is just packed into this one pasuk. And it's interesting. Kirot Mordechai ki yatsa ketzef. The anger went out. Remember the pasuk. Mordechai yada et kol asher na'asa. Mordechai knew what had happened. What do you mean knew? It was in CNN. Everybody knew what happened. Everybody knew what happened. What was going on? So what did he know? He figured out that we say it clicked in English. They clicked in Hebrew. We say asimon nafal. Except then you have to teach your grandchildren what an asimon is because they don't know what that is. So. He realized this probably has to do with the fact that OUisrael did not return to Eretz Yisrael after the Hatzharat Koresh, after the edict of Koresh, and therefore they're going through a process of tshuva, with fasting and so on. And remember the Rav pointing out, it says v'tzumo alai, and they should fast, val tochlu val tishtu, and they shouldn't eat and drink. That's the same thing. The Rav said it's not the same thing. Eating and drinking in biblical Hebrew, there's a word called inui, torturing yourself, and that's in rabbinic Hebrew called the ta'anit. And the ta'anit comes from the phrase v'initem et nafshotechem. You should torture yourself for Yom Kippur, which don't do this, don't do that, don't do this, don't do that. So it's not Chinese torture. It's not eating and not drinking, and for Yom Kippur, a few other things that we remove pleasures from life, denial of certain pleasures, and that's the inui. That's a ta'anit. Okay, so don't eat, don't drink. That's a tanit. Tzumu means like when you braid your hair, you take wild hair and you make it into a tzama. What's a tzama? A braid. What does it mean, a braid? Loose hairs become locked into. So first it says, Kinlos at kol hayudim. Haman said, Yeshno amachad. Yeah, there's one people, except they're mifuzaro forad. They're dispersed, not just geographically. Everybody's got their opinions and so on, right? There's a famous vote from Chaim Weizmann to Truman. When Truman told him, he says, I'm president over 200 million Americans. He says, that's nothing. I'm president over 2 million presidents. Like everybody here has a deya. And that's why in the Tfilah L'Shlom HaMdina, we say, Rav Herzog writes this beautifully, Ushlach orcha v'mitcha l'rasheha sareha v'yoatzeha. There's leaders, there's ministers. What about the people? What about Toshaveh? Well, we said it already, Yoatzeha, the advisors. Every Israeli is an advisor to the government, has what to say, has an opinion. So we were all dispersed in every sense of the word. So, Lech Knosset, let's bring them all together. Not good enough. Vitsumu alai, let's make it into an integrated, woven together, that it should be Kol Yisrael Arevim Zelazeh. They should be interwoven with each other. And that's what he wanted. And furthermore, Al tochlu val tishlu shloshet yamim. 3 days and 3 nights we won't eat and drink. So the concept of tzom is here. So he says, Vashsak, kashar misped, gazar tzom, vayeshev al efer, mize yamod lechaper shkaga, limchol chatot avot avotenu. This is a rhetorical question mark. And who is the one who's going to bring about the forgiveness? Well, obviously it's HaKadosh Baruch Hu, except that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is not there on the stage. It's the only biblical sefer without the name of God. Esther min HaTorah minayin, vanochi haster astir panim. Kadosh Baruch Hu's, Esther's name is not there. Kadosh Baruch Hu's not there. Esther's there, but Kadosh Baruch Hu's not there in the book. So who's going to be the one to represent the Kadosh Baruch Hu? Netz parach milulav, chen hadasa amda leorer yeshenim. Who's the chen? It's Esther. It's Esther, right? Chen v'chesed l'fanav. So she's the chesed, she's the chen. And Hadassah is her Hebrew name, right? Esther is the Persian name. But Mordechai is the Persian name also. The question is whether Mordechai is the same Mordechai mentioned in Mordechai Bilshan and Sefer Ezra. Maybe it is. But Hadassah clearly is a Hebrew name. It says it clearly in the Megillah. And she's called Esther. Yeah. So I don't know. What was it? Mordechai's? Petachia. Could be it was Petachia. Yeah. Could be a purely biblical Hebrew name. And the Mordechai is already a Golos name. Fine. His name is Ruvain, but his name's Bob, right? Richard or Ruvain or something like that. It's Robert, whatever, like Sada. Okay, that's what happens, OUisrael. So why the Netz Parach Milulav Hain Hadassah Amad? There's no question that what he has in mind here is the Hadass from the Arba Minim and something about the Lulav. What do we know about the Lulav? Sure, the Lulav spreads out, except that on Sukkot, we don't want the Lulav to spread out. We want it to be bound together. When you look for a kosher Lulav, you don't look for a Lulav where all the leaves are all over the place. Nobody's going to use that kind of Lulav. You're going to use a Lulav that's stuck together, as we say. That's bound together, and especially on top of the spitz. There's no break even, because it's broken in the spitz, and people bring their magnifying glasses, to make sure it's not broken in the spitz, that the center two leaves are still together. So this kind of a lulav is what Hadassah, Esther, is actually going to forge amongst Klal Yisrael, that type of togetherness. And the Arba Minim by halacha is lulav tzarich eged. And that doesn't mean the bus company. It means that lulav has to be bound together. Bound together. You can't just, have the lulav on the table there and the etrog over there and say, all right, I have Arba Minim, let's say a bracha. No, you got to pick it up in your hand and you have to hold them together. And that's why the minhag is to even tie the lulav together with Adasim and Aravot. It should be bound together. Lulav tzarich eged. And that's what Esther is doing. And what is she doing? To wake up those in a deep slumber. Amda le'orer yishenim. Now let's turn the page to source number 16. In source 16, it says, Yeshno am echad. Yeshno, Yud Shin Nun Vav, which means there is one the nation. Haman saying this. So the Medrash says, Yeshenim heim min ha-mitzvot. They're in a deep slumber from the mitzvah. 1 second. What? They weren't doing mitzvot? They weren't wearing tefillin shel Rabbeinu Tam? They were. You know which mitzvah they were in deep slumber? Yishuv Haaretz. Coming back to Eretz Yisrael. Deep slumber. Amar leish Achashverosh. Yeshenim heim. They missed the boat. They're sleeping, right? The historic boat arrived and said, all off, depart, go to Eretz Yisrael. And they didn't wake up. Vata mevakesh le'orecha alecha. And now we have to wake them up. Do you remember in Sefer Shoftim, source 17? Vatiyashnehu al birkeha. Who is this said about? Shimshon with Dalila. Vatikra la'ish vatigalach et sheva machlefot rosho. He had these gorgeous locks, and of hair. And she, Dalila, calls the barber to give him a haircut while he's sleeping. He's intoxicated, sleeping. And the Rav made a big to-do about this in one of the Tshuva drashas, how the idea of sin is nothing but a spiritual slumber, and it's based on the Rambam in source 18. In spite of the fact that the mitzvah of shofar is mentioned in the Torah as a mitzvah, remez yeshbo, there is an allusion that goes with this. Klomar, that is to say, uru yishenim mishnatchem v'nirdamim hekitzu mitardamatchem. Wake up from your slumber. Get up. Time to get up. Chipsu ma'asechem. So what is the shofar? It's an alarm clock. It's supposed to jolt you. And if you recall back in Yonah, and one of the reasons we read Yonah, there's the big storm on the high sea, and everybody's calling to their gods, and he goes down for his afternoon shluf. And they go down and they say, Ben Adam, Malacha Nirdam, Kum Kra Lelohecha. Now is not the time to sleep. Get up. And the Chenu B'nai Edot HaMisrach lifted this out of context and begin the slichus every day for 40 days, for every day. Ben Adam Alecha Nerdam Kum Kira B'Tachanunim. The same thing. Wake up, get up. It's Elul. It's almost Rosh Hashanah. It's almost Yom Kippur. This is the slumber that we were in, and we needed a jolt. And who was the alarm clock? Haman. Haman was the alarm clock. And Haman with Lashmig, what? So there is I always say there's a unwritten 11th chapter of Megillat Esther. The big tragedy, we finish the Megillah and we go into a frenzy. Shoshanas Yaakov, Zahala v'Samecha. Okay, so Shushanat Yaakov, you turn to the first page, Shushanat Yaakov, so you see that it's based on Layudim Haita Ora v'Simcha it says Shushan Tzahala v'Samecha. Right? It says here Shushan Tzahala v'Samecha. But here we're not talking about Shushan. It's a play on the word Shushan. Shoshanat. It's a play on the word Shushan, and it's based on Shir HaShirim. Kishoshana ben Achochim is Am Yisrael. We are the rosebud. We are. So it's not Shushan, the town of city of Shushan. It's Shoshanat Yaakov Tzahala v'Samecha. That's what we do. And what do we forget? We leave Esther behind in the palace of Achashverosh. Never to leave as a free person, as a Jewish woman. And she and Achashverosh conceive a child. And he is the second Dariavesh Hasheni. And he's Jewish, B-U-U-D. He's Jewish, got a Jewish mother. And he is the one that gives Am Yisrael a real kick and push and shove. And slowly but slowly, a fraction, how many? 5% of Am Yisrael are Tzionim and go back to Eretz Yisrael. But it was good enough to have Shivat Zion and rebuild the Beit HaMikdash. It wasn't what the Nevi'im actually thought, what Zechariah Nevi had in mind, but it was something. It was what we call in Yiddish, epis. It was something. Nothing to sneeze about. And therefore, there was a return to Eretz Yisrael that comes as a direct result from the Purim story. That's why, when the Rambam considers the reason why we don't say Hallel on Purim, and the Gemara gives three reasons. Two of them have to do with the fact that this has to do with Chutz La'aretz. Chanukah is in Eretz Yisrael, Purim Chutz La'aretz, no Hallel. The second is, at the end of the day, we remain subservient to Achashverosh. Vayasam Achashverosh mas al haaretz v'iyayam, and Achashverosh laid taxes. Well, why do we have to read this twice a year, night of Purim, morning of Purim, that we have had to pay taxes? Why is that in the Megillah? There are some people, they bang when we say mas, because mas hachnasa, income tax, is gematria amolek. So they bang. Yeah, it's true, it has to be true. So they bang. The answer is that after everything that happened, it was business as usual. Akati avdei Achashverosh anan. We still remain subservient to Achashverosh, so you can't say Hallel on something like that. But there's another reason. It says that the reading of the Megillah is the Hallel, that actually we are required to say Hallel on Purim. And there's some of the poskim that raise the question, if I'm stuck somewhere in the world, I don't have a Megillah, but I have my Siddur, should I say Hallel? So they say you should say Hallel, but don't say a bracha on it because we're not sure if you have to say Hallel. So the Rambam actually adopts that line. Why? Because the Rambam believes that Purim is also an Eretz Yisrael story. It's the story that will lead to the rebuilding of Knesset, of Am Yisrael going back to Eretz Yisrael. That's why the Rambam tells us that the reason that there's the 15th of Adar in the walled cities from the days of Yeshua, not from the days of Achashverosh, is not only, as the Talmud Yerushalmi says, to give kavod to Eretz Yisrael that was destroyed at the time of the Purim story, but he says, "V'yez zichron le'Eretz Yisrael b'neis hazeh." There'll be something about Eretz Yisrael in this miracle. You know what it was? The coming into Eretz Yisrael, and that was Yeshua ben Nun. He was the first time Am Yisrael comes to Eretz Yisrael, and Chachamim wanted to integrate that moment into the Purim story. And that's why there's the 15th, the walled city from the days of Yeshua ben Nun. Okay, next week we'll go back to our Zmirot, and in 2 weeks, which we're going to be our final shir before Pesach, the center is not going to have shurim after Oy.
Do that.
They did it. So we're going to do the poem in 2 weeks. Vayhi b'chatzi halayla. The poem Vayhi b'chatzi halayla from the end of the Haggadah is going to be in 2 weeks.